Hello Blazer fans, and welcome to this edition of the Blazersedge.com videocast. I'm Dave Deckard from Blazersedge.com, here as always with the brain behind the camera and our crack videocast staff to talk to you about the Portland Trail Blazers. We are filming as we speak on the eve of the draft lottery. Here's hoping that the Blazers get lucky. We will see what happens together tomorrow. In the meantime, enjoy the questions and the answers. Dave, odds are we're going to end up with the number 6 and number 11 pick in this year's draft. Looking at the NBA draft history, it's easy to see that most picks at number 6 and number 11 are guys that are not common names around the league. With that said, there's always a chance you make a great choice at these draft positions. That probably has to do with a little luck and some good scouting. What are your critical thoughts on the Trailblazers' scouting abilities? Signed, Ron. Well, I'll tell you, Ron, if you took the team logo off of the Blazers picks and just looked at them in the abstract, I'd say over the course of history, Portland has done just about what you'd expect in the draft. When they've had high-level picks, they've looked very good. It would be hard to argue that there was a better trio, for instance, than Greg Oden, Brandon Roy, and LaMarcus Aldridge back in 2006-2007. You can look at Martell Webster, but everybody's going to have hits and misses. When they've had great picks, they've looked great. Their mid-level picks have been more hit and miss. Jared Bayless, Sebastian Telfair, that kind of player. Those guys are still in the league. They were not everything that the Blazers hoped for, and so the team didn't keep them, but they were still decent players. When you go down to the bottom of the first round or into the second round, this is where it gets more sketchy. But really, it's more sketchy for everyone there. Show me a team that always hits on its late first round and early second round picks, and I'll show you the San Antonio Spurs. If you're not them, you've got to live with your losses sometimes. Portland has not done real well in recent years, but we don't know if that's bad drafting or just the random effect of drafting players that you can't tell how they're going to do. So, in summation, the Blazers have looked great when they've had high-level picks. They've looked not so good when they've had low-level picks, just like every other team in the NBA. Dave. Chad Buchanan hasn't done much to impress with his trades and draft picks from 2011. If the Blazers don't have a new GM by the draft, how will the Blazers fare? Signed, Brad. First of all, before you can convince me that Chad Buchanan hasn't done a good job for the Blazers, you have to convince me that the decisions really were his fault and his fault alone. You can't go for 2 years saying you're making decisions by committee and then at the end of that time tag all your bad decisions on one person. I think Buchanan was obviously influential, but I don't believe that his voice was the only one heard, nor that he was the solely responsible for the Blazers' bad decisions. Besides, when you look at it, even the worst of decisions, and I would include Raymond Felton and Jamal Crawford in there, were not actually that bad. They were simply calculated risks that didn't turn out. Last summer, the Blazers got a bunch of guys on single-year contracts to preserve cap space for this summer. They did exactly that. Who cares if the players themselves didn't work out? That was always built into the system. You just let them go and take the savings. No big loss. Now, moving on to this season, it's unlikely that even if the Blazers hired a GM today, he would be able to overhaul their entire scouting staff in the 3 weeks remaining before the draft. Basically, they know what they're going to do this June. They know what they're aiming for. It's in place, and they're probably going to follow through with it no matter who they have in the head position. Besides, the Blazers probably aren't looking for a guy who's a draft guru to fill that spot right now. They're looking for a businessman, a guy able to do contracts and consummate trades. So it's unlikely that the draft will be affected too much, especially in the short term. Dave, everybody keeps glorifying the cap space the Blazers have this summer as if it's the answer. What good is cap space really? Isn't there a chance the Blazers just end up empty anyway? Paulo. Well, Paulo, my friend, I don't know how long you have watched the Blazers, but former Blazers television announcer Steve Jones always used to say that cap space doesn't play. Now that's very true, but keep in mind that cap space is good for more than just signing free agents, the pool of which is limited in any given summer. Cap space can also be used to facilitate imbalanced trades that otherwise couldn't have been made if a team was over the cap. The trade restrictions are eased, you can take on more salary than you give out, you become a very attractive trading partner and can pick up assets either for now or for later in 3-team deals using your cap space. Also keep in mind that when Steve Jones was saying what he was saying, the Blazers were a playoff team, and they needed players on the court who could make a push deep into the postseason, and that was the end of the story. The Blazers are not in that situation now. They need a variety of players at a variety of positions, all the talent they can get, and for that, abstract cap space can really help you. So I'd say that there is some risk that the Blazers might come up empty this summer or might not be able to achieve their ideal, but at some point, somewhere, sometime, they're going to be able to use that cap space to their advantage.
Dave, we know the Blazers have cap space this year. What other teams are they competing with for free agents? Who else has cap space? Signed, Harold.
Here are the teams that have potential to have cap space this summer. And when I say potential, I mean some of them might have to make a couple moves that they're probably already going to make, like renouncing some of their free agents to be who are old and making huge salaries. But all things being equal, you'll probably be looking at these teams competing with the Blazers for free agents and other assets. Those teams are the Celtics, the Wizards, the Nets, the Bobcats, the Cavaliers, the Rockets, the Pacers, the Bucks, Timberwolves, Hornets, Suns, Kings, and Raptors. The real scary name in there, I think, is the Indiana Pacers. They already went to the second round of the playoffs. They've got a lot of guys on cheap contracts. They only have to do a little bit of fiddling to free up a bunch of cap space, and I think they're going to be an attractive destination. So this is probably what they're going to shoot for, and probably the main competition that the Blazers will worry about.
Dave, what are your thoughts about the state of the Blazers rebuilding in 2012 versus the rebuild in 2006? I see some similarities. Established talented power forward, a couple of upcoming lottery picks, but obviously it isn't exactly the same. Signed, Stephen.
Fair enough, Stephen. Both are rebuilding projects, but there are some significant differences between the one in 2012 and the one that happened in 2006. First of all, though both have power forwards in common, which you mentioned, this time they want to actually keep the power forward that they have. Back in 2006, I don't think they really cared what happened to Zach Randolph as long as they could get something for him. He had a ton of off-court problems. He had a limited game, although incredibly prolific offensively. They knew he wasn't going to be the franchise player by that point, and so they were willing to dump him. LaMarcus Aldridge they want to hang on to, so they have more burden to build quickly around him than they did around Zach. Second difference, their picks this time probably aren't going to be as high as they were in 2006, and certainly not as high as the one in 2007. On the other hand, expectations are higher. The Blazers have just gone through that rebuilding project. They've reached a plateau, which, if not exactly where they wanted to be, is still pretty close to the playoffs. They're going to want to build on that instead of starting over, because that's what fans expect emotionally, if not intellectually. And finally, in retrospect, you have to look back at 2006 and 2007 and say that was like winning the lottery. Not just the NBA lottery, but winning the lottery, period. It's not going to happen again. It was an incredible confluence of events, an incredible confluence of luck that led to those picks and those players being available. The chances of that happening again are infinitesimal. So the Blazers are not going to be able to rise as quickly with this rebuilding project as they did in 2006 and 2007. I would not look for that. Look for a more measured effort, and hopefully the fruits will show up a few years down the road.
Dave, there are quite a few similarities between this current Lakers team and the team that the Blazers could potentially have been.
Given health, the Blazers' core would have been Brandon Roy, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Greg Oden, eerily similar to that of the Lakers' core of Kobe Bryant, Pau Gasol, and Andrew Bynum. Given the similarities and the likely competencies of the core players, would the Blazers have been any more competitive against the Thunder roster? Signed, Rick.
Before I answer this, a shout out to any Thunder or Spurs or Lakers fans who may be watching. I want to say definitively that it doesn't matter what would have been, it matters what you actually do. I mean, no insult to Oklahoma City or San Antonio or anybody else who has truly excelled in this league. That is all that matters. Take your deep playoff position, take your championship trophies and celebrate them. They are yours and not Portland's. That said, answering this question, I will tell you, beyond the shadow of a doubt, had Oden and Aldridge and Roy all remained healthy for the duration of their careers, we would be talking about the Oklahoma City Thunder and everybody else in the West chasing the Blazers and not vice versa. That team had a plethora of talent. They had incredible depth. They had incredible defense, which is an overlooked factor in many championship runs, and the Blazers had it in spades. In fact, they had more defensive potential than any team that I've seen in recent history. What Greg Oden did out there for the team defensively, even in his brief stints on the court, was incredible. And he would have allowed players like Nicholas Batum and Brandon Roy and all those wing players to make the most of their defensive ability, which in some cases was considerable. What should have happened really was that series with Dallas last year. That should have been the Blazers' coming out party, all other things being equal. The Blazers should have been last year's Mavericks. I don't know that they would have won a title. I think they could have gotten to the finals. I think they might have been beaten by Miami, but I think having gotten their nose bloodied, they would have come back then with more resolve and ready to win over the next decade. Now, you may call me an optimist, but keep in mind that everybody else in the world, Blazers affiliated, calls me a pessimist. So don't change your tune now. Just trust me. I've seen a lot of basketball. I watched this team very carefully. This team would have contended for titles, and no one else in the West, including the Thunder, would have been close.
Dave, is there any chance that the Blazers go after Eric Gordon? I love this guy, and I think he is an amazing talent. Signed, Sabas.
Yes, I do believe indeed that the Blazers could go after Eric Gordon in free agency this year. He's a great scorer. He's a very good shooter. He's undersized, though, and his defense really is pretty bad. He also needs the ball a ton, so be prepared for that if the Blazers get him. You're going to see a guy taking a lot of shots, a lot of the offense on his shoulders, handling the ball quite a bit. Ideally, I see Gordon as a Jason Terry kind of player. Now, I don't know if you remember, but back in the day, Jason Terry started his career with the Atlanta Hawks. He was an incredibly talented player, very good at scoring, but he wasn't quite enough to carry that team to where they wanted to be. So Atlanta gets rid of him, Dallas picks him up, and he becomes the Jason Terry that we all know and love. A smart veteran player because he had other players around him who were also talented, who could bring out his strengths and compensate for his weaknesses. I believe that Gordon needs exactly that experience with the next team that he goes to in order to prosper. The question would be whether the Blazers could provide him that. I tend to think the answer is no right now. They don't have enough talented players, they don't have enough experienced players to put around him to bring out his best parts and to overcome his faults. If Gordon did come here, he'd probably see himself as some kind of offensive savior. Maybe the Blazers and their fans would see him as that as well, and I don't think that's going to benefit his game or the team. So I think you could get kind of excited. He'd certainly be a big name and a prolific scorer if the Blazers got him, but I don't think that he would be the answer.
Dave, how does Blazers Edge rate from a viewership standpoint versus the other SB Nation NBA sites around the league? We might be down as a team or organization right now, but we've got to have one of the most followed sites around the league. Give this Blazer fan something to be proud of. Ron. Well, Ron, I've never been a numbers chaser, and we prefer to let the product do the talking around here and not brag too much. But I wouldn't want you to be depressed, so we'll let you in on a couple things. First of all, we've been for years the largest blog around SB Nation on a per capita basis, and I don't ever see us losing that distinction. The following that we have for a small market and a small team is pretty incredible and has consistently amazed people and opened a lot of doors for us, and we thank you certainly for that. Also, we're perpetually in the hunt for the top spot around SB Nation overall. Sometimes we're the biggest blog, sometimes it's someone else and we're a couple spots below. It'll depend on the time of year and what else is going on. But you don't have to confine yourself just to SB Nation. We are also the largest blog, largest online site, period, covering the Portland Trailblazers in existence. Nobody else with the Trailblazers as their primary source of subject is even close to where we are. Obviously, if you want to talk about ESPN.com and Yahoo.com as a whole, we're talking about several leagues and several sources of readers, so we don't compare to them. But if you look at their individual parts covering the Blazers, we are bigger than all of those too. So, chin up, little buckaroo. It's okay. Even if the team isn't doing very well, you still follow the best and biggest blog in existence when it comes to this subject matter. Thank you all for that, and thank you for tuning in to our videocast. We will see you again next week when we will know exactly the pick or picks that the Blazers have. Cross your fingers, hope for good luck, do whatever you have to do, and remember, have a great week, especially a great Wednesday, and go Blazers.